All right, today we're diving into something really strange, a story coming out of Nigeria that's a real paradox. It's all about protest, priorities, and, well, what happens when a country seems to be looking everywhere else while its own house is literally on fire.
Yeah, it kicks off with a scene that honestly sounds like it's ripped straight from a spy novel. I want you to just picture this for a second. The year is 2026. Tensions between Iran and the West are through the roof. And then, thousands of miles away, in Nigeria, something completely unexpected starts to happen.
So you've got cities like Gombe, Kano, Kaduna, and thousands of people are pouring into the streets. But here's the twist. They're not protesting the stuff you'd expect, like corruption or the rampant insecurity. No, they're waving Iranian flags. They're chanting anti-American slogans. They've got signs saying, "We stand with Iran." And this wasn't just a small thing. It was passionate, it was organized, and it was happening all over.
So that brings us to the core of this whole thing. The question that just doesn't seem to make sense. Why? Why would people in a country that is facing one of the deadliest crises on the planet, why would they pour all their energy into a conflict happening somewhere else? Well, to even begin to get our heads around this, we have to look at just how bad things really are at home in Nigeria.
Right, so this is Nigeria's unseen war. You're probably not seeing this on the nightly news, but when you look at the numbers, wow. They paint a truly grim picture of a nation that's basically fighting a devastating, undeclared war with itself.
Okay, just let this number hit you for a second. Over 600,000. That's how many people were killed in Nigeria in just 1 year. And get this isn't some battlefield number from a declared war. Nope, this is the official count from Nigeria's own government of people killed by things like banditry, terrorism, and local violence.
Now, to really put that in perspective, think about this. The whole world, and rightly so, has been watching the war in Ukraine. But the number of people killed by insecurity in Nigeria in that same one-year time frame, it absolutely dwarfs the estimated military deaths in Ukraine. We're talking about a humanitarian crisis on a massive scale, and it's happening almost completely out of the global spotlight.
And it gets worse. This violence has actually created its own terrifying economy. Kidnapping for ransom has turned into a massive multi-billion-dollar industry. We're talking over $1.4 billion pulled from terrified families in just 1 year. It's crippling people, not just financially, but emotionally.
So, you see, it's not just the death toll. That's the key takeaway here. This is like a total societal breakdown. You've got over 2 million people kidnapped, more than 1 million forced from their homes. Mass abductions are literally a daily thing. This is the backdrop. This is the reality that makes those protests for Iran so confusing.
Okay, so how on earth do we explain it? Well, the answer isn't really in geopolitics, it's in psychology. It turns out that when things at home feel completely hopeless, when the problems seem too big to fix, our minds have a funny way of looking for an escape.
The source we're looking at has a name for this: displaced solidarity. Think of it like a coping mechanism. When your own problems are messy, complicated, and there are no clear good guys or bad guys, it's actually easier to get passionate about something far away that seems much more black and white, you know? A clear story of good versus evil.
And a huge part of what drives this is something called identity fusion. It sounds academic, but it's pretty simple. For these protesters, who are mostly from a group called the IMN, their identity as Shiite Muslims is so deeply connected, so fused with the global Shiite community, which sees Iran as its center, that an attack on Iran isn't just news. It feels personal, like deeply personal. And this quote here just nails it. An attack on Iran isn't a headline, it's felt like a personal loss, almost like a death in the family. And when you're feeling that kind of intense emotion, it can totally push aside any logical thoughts about the very real dangers happening, right down the street.
But there's something else going on here, and it's a bit darker. It's called learned helplessness. Basically, after decades of seeing nothing but corruption and government failure, a lot of people might have just given up hope that they can actually change things in their own country. So, protesting for a cause thousands of miles away, it gives you a sense of control, a feeling of being part of something big and powerful, even if it does absolutely nothing to fix the problems at home.
Now, of course, this isn't all just happening on its own. This potent mix of emotion and frustration, well, it's being carefully stirred by an outside player that has its own game plan.
For Iran, this group in Nigeria, the IMN, is a major strategic win. I mean, it's a foothold in Africa's most populous country. It's a way to push back against their rival, Saudi Arabia, and it gives them a loyal proxy group. Tehran has been really smart about this, tapping into the very real anger the IMN has towards the Nigerian government, especially after a brutal massacre of its members back in 2015.
So what you end up with is this really lopsided relationship. Iran gets all this geopolitical clout and a proxy on the ground. But what do the protesters get? They risk being labeled as traitors, as agents of a foreign power, they lose any credibility they might have had at home, and they basically hand the government a perfect excuse to come down on them even harder.
Just take a look at this timeline here. You can see the relationship between the IMN's leaders in Iran getting closer and closer, and then boom, these massive protests erupt. But the truly tragic part, it also shows Nigerians being killed on their own soil, not while fighting for their own safety, but for a conflict that's happening an ocean away.
And remember, while all of this is going on, while the focus is on Iran, let's not forget what was happening at home. This is the exact same time that those horrifying numbers, the killings, the kidnappings, were climbing. The difference is just, it's jarring. It really lays the whole paradox bare, doesn't it? Focusing on problems abroad, while your own country is literally in a state of collapse.
So where does all this leave Nigeria? What does it mean for the future? Well, when you mix this kind of internal collapse with outside meddling, you get a situation that is, well, it's like a ticking time bomb.
And here's why. Look at Nigeria's population. A whopping 70% of the people are under 30, and over 40% of them are unemployed. That is a huge pool of young, frustrated people who feel totally let down by their own country. They're looking for something to believe in, some cause to fight for, and groups like the IMN, with Iran's backing, are right there, ready to give them one.
You know, the source material puts it in really stark terms. It says state failure in Nigeria isn't a question of if, it's something that's already happening. And when you drop a foreign conflict into an environment that's already this fragile, you're basically lighting a fuse on a much, much bigger bomb.
And that leaves us with this final kind of haunting question. When people in a collapsing nation look away, is it a form of survival? A desperate psychological trick to cope with an impossible situation? Or is it the final symptom of decay, a sign that a society has just lost the will to even try to save itself? There are no easy answers here. It's a paradox that honestly has some pretty big lessons for all of us.